Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Poland Daily History. Today we are standing in front of the Potocki family palace to learn more about the Polish aristocracy. They are the most independent and most prosperous branch of the noble class in all of Europe. However, after 1945, following the beginning of the Soviet communist regime, they were heavily persecuted. Today we will dig more into the details and intricacies of the Polish aristocracy.
The Potocki family palace now houses the Polish Ministry of Culture, but Count Marek Potocki was kind enough to invite us to his private apartment where we uncover more about the history of his family and learn how the position of Polish aristocracy shifted over the centuries.
Poland eventually regained its freedom after 123 years. What did the regaining independence affect your family?
Affect us a lot because we lost the biggest piece of land because of the Russian Revolution,
Right.
and the peace treaty signed in Brześć in 1918 or 1919, and our property called Antoniny, enormously developed by my grandfather Józef Potocki, remained in the Soviet occupied area.
Right.
In 1939, because of the war having been won in this part of Europe by the Soviet army, we lost everything. You know, in 1945, we were lucky to remain alive because quite a number of our cousins were shot or sent to prison or sent to gulags, etc. But between the two wars, we didn't do too poorly because my grandfather was offered the job of the newly created Poland ambassador to France, to Paris. He refused and he said, "You give me London or I give up." And Piłsudski, the boss of Poland at that time, he said, "Potocki wants too much. He either takes Paris, not London." My father refused. So this is, but my father's older brother became the ambassador to Turkey, first time after 123 years of having no diplomatic relations with a high port, with Turkey. And then later on, he became the Poland's ambassador to Washington in America. So he was quite an important Polish diplomat. And my father, who fought in the First World War as a Russian officer, then in the Polish Bolshevik War, 1920, was decorated by Piłsudski. He remembered with pride his participation in the Polish Bolshevik War. His memoirs were published a few days ago, and he very, very widely and very colorfully describes his participation in the Polish Bolshevik War, which was a very, very deadly war, very important war.
In the interwar era, the position of the Polish nobility changed. The Polish leader Marshal Piłsudski received his political education within socialist circles and had to balance the demands of the working class with those of the landed aristocracy. Piłsudski did, however, recognize the contribution of the patriotic aristocracy in the Polish-Soviet War, including the sacrifice made by a relative of the Potocki family, Stanisław Radziwiłł.
So how did the position of the nobility shifted between the First and the Second Republic?
In theory, it didn't.
Right.
But in practice it did, because very many of the Polish very wealthy families lost a lot of the properties because they remained in the East. Also, the bosses of the newly created Poland, with the Marshal Piłsudski on its head, we cannot forget that they were socialists. Therefore, totally different kind of people came to power than the ancient nobility. You know, very well-educated, smart people started to occupy important positions, and the name stopped counting. Before, the name and the position of the family counted a lot. starting after the First World War, it was quite visible. And maybe I can mention that very recently in Poland were published the memories of the first American ambassador, Gibson, who was American ambassador to Poland between 1918 and 1924. And it was published simultaneously in English in America and in Polish in Poland. And he very well describes how these few leading families lost in the position, not only money but power, influence, etc.
During the Second Republic, how is Marshal Piłsudski's position towards nobility?
I have to tell you a very close family story. Marshal Piłsudski, as I said, was a socialist, but he was born in Lithuania, and he considered himself as Polish-Lithuanian or Lithuanian-Polish. His Lithuanian roots were very strong in him. So when my grandmother's younger brother, Stanisław Radziwiłł, another very important Polish family, decided that he wants to join the 1920 Poland-Russia military conflict, Piłsudski was delighted to accept him because he was a Radziwiłł. But the story says that very rapidly his young Radziwiłł became bored at the Piłsudski headquarters, and he said, I want to fight. And he went to the front and was killed, and he died a heroic death, killed by the Soviets with the bayonets, you know. And I'm telling you the story because there was a very, he died 20 or 30 years ago, 40 years ago. There was a very famous Soviet writer called Ostrowski, and he wrote a book called How the Steel Was Hardened. Jak zakaliałeś stal. I had to read it as a young man in the communist Poland, 1945, 1950, the book. And in that book, the poor Ostrowski, who was blind, confused my father, Roman Potocki, with his very close relative, Stanisław Radziwiłł, and described in detail the death of my father. And he didn't commit, he didn't lie. Being a blind man, the Soviet soldiers said, my ubili polskiego pana. We killed the Polish lord. And they mixed up Radziwiłł and Potocki because they were, closer related families. But my father died in his own bed, and this poor Radziwiłł died this heroic death. But Marshal Piłsudski liked very much to have somebody with the name of Radziwiłł to work for him as a personal assistant, as an aide de camp, So this is the story.
The Polish nobles used to form the backbones of Polish society. The Potocki family was one of the most prominent and especially influential within the military. Count Potocki has given us today a very interesting snapshot of Polish history. That's it for today. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. I'll see you next time on Poland Daily History.